Hey everyone, so today I will be talking about how trans women are blamed for a lot of their suffering. This can include medical concerns, traumas, mental health, or even just the deaths of trans women. This video has been so much more time consuming than everything else I've been working on. So if you do like it and you think it's worth the extra effort, be sure to let me know so I can make more videos like it in the future. This has been a very large topic for sure. So I've decided to divide it into parts, and this will be the first part that mainly addresses medicalized aspects of the topic. This topic is a lot more serious and dark than the rest of my videos, so if you're sensitive to topics of transphobia or just discussing concepts of transphobia and trans discrimination, feel free to skip this video out. I'll also add that the phenomenon of marginalized people being blamed for their own discrimination or their own suffering is in no way unique to trans women. There's pretty much every marginalized group has some form of this, but I've never heard anyone speak on trans women specifically, so I thought I'd add my own personal experience. The first part of trans suffering that I'd like to discuss is sort of the fictionalized aspects of the dangers of transition that are either totally mischaracterized or are completely made up. There's a lot of different variations of this, and sometimes they've got scientific backing, but a lot of the times they don't. To be clear, there are certain risks to transition, just like there are certain risks to taking Tylenol or going through puberty in general. But trans people are largely aware of the risks because it's mandated. It's made to be known, but a lot of these are sort of points outside of any sort of medical consensus. They're sort of made as a gotcha, here's something you weren't told when you got HRT. For this current video, I'll do an example that's probably one of the strongest ones, one that certainly actually has studies behind it, and one that I've recently been told about to my discomfort. This is the supposed stroke risk of estradiol and HRT. The basic premise of this is to demonize the act of transition, propose it as unnatural, unnecessary. It's meant to discourage and talk people out of it, remove autonomy, and demonstrate people to be not of rational mind to make these decisions. It's used to restrict access to HRT, and most importantly, it's used to stir up anti-trans sentiment in the public who doesn't have time to actually read these studies, doesn't have access to the studies, and largely the people that are throwing them around don't even read the studies either. This won't be an academic breakdown with citations and all of that. I do that way too much with school. If you're interested in that, I suggest you do your own research. But this is going to be more of a casual debunking, just for entertainment. So first of all, what did these studies conclude? They did find that trans women, as a population sample, had a higher stroke risk. The first noteworthy thing about the study is that it studies a very young population. The majority of the people in these studies are in their 20s and very, very unlikely to get a stroke. This means that a tiny random error of a few cases just can double the cases of strokes in the population. So it's definitely not an accurate determinant. Most of them don't pay attention to the dosage, the type of hormones people are on, how long they're on them, Like even the ones that do like raise a lot of contradictory information, where either higher dosage or people who've been on hormones for longer show that they actually are less likely to get a stroke than the people who've been on lower dosages or haven't been on as long. These factors alone indicate that estradiol is likely not the cause, but it's not enough to debunk it. But like, there's a lot of other stuff that's wrong with the study. While they were measuring people that were on like HRT and those that weren't, they never isolated for like any other variables. And like the trans population is at risk for like a huge number of social reasons. When you have a marginalized population, they have like much higher levels of daily stress, which greatly increases the risk of a stroke. Black women alone have like a 50% higher stroke risk than white women. Trans women are also 4 times more likely to be under the poverty line than cis people. This isn't just like a stress factor that like influences stroke occurrence, but it also is like a huge predictor of diet. Trans women are much more likely to be unemployed, and they're much more likely to be homeless, and they're much more likely to be fired from their jobs when they do have jobs. Trans women have dramatically like insane multiples that like haven't even been properly studied of like increased risk of sexual and physical abuse, traumas that drastically affect stress levels and drastically affect stroke risk. Trans women are also much more likely to be rejected from social networks, whether it's friend groups, whether it's coworkers, or whether it's their own family. And especially when it's your own family, that can drastically affect your like nutritional literacy. All of these are huge predictors, and like when someone's like 4 times more likely to be in poverty alone, you'd expect a larger increase than like double the population. A lot of these studies and similar studies also try to observe blood clots, but like totally ignore the fact that like trans women in their 20s are very likely to go into surgery at least like once, if not like several times, for like gender affirming care. That entire statistic could just be people who got blood clots from surgery. So like a lot of these statistics could simply be measuring the fact that like trans women go into surgery and just like not even like think about it twice and like how it affects their statistics. Regardless of the actual facts, the reason that these points are used and they're brought up to like trans women and they're brought up to like stir sentiment is not at all out of anything logical, and it's not really out of concern for trans people and their lives. It's largely to remove trans women's autonomy over themselves, and it's largely to refuse treatments that like people themselves are personally uncomfortable with. They're emotional arguments at the core. HRT saves a lot of lives. These same like people that peddle these ideas largely don't care about like the actual things that impact like trans people's life expectancy, like the impact of like stress and intense discrimination that drives down life expectancy. I've never once heard these same people talk anything about like trans murder victims or assault victims or sexual assault or anything else. This is not to say anything about the researchers specifically, just the people who are entirely misinformed and have no sense of critical thinking or actually reading a study to understand what it actually means and continue to peddle it for like horrible ulterior motives. One of these concerns that is actually real is the concern of breast cancer. it is true that, like, you have a higher risk of breast cancer because of HRT, and this is something that you are actually warned about by the doctors. But based on every study I've read so far on actually observing trans women against cis women, trans women are less likely to have breast cancer than like cisgender women. Where you generally see increases in breast cancer risk is when the studies compare transgender women to cisgender men, which is a bit of a no shit. If you have a larger amount of breast tissue, then you're obviously going to be more likely to have breast cancer because there's more tissue that replicates and can possibly turn into cancer. This is largely just used to insinuate that trans women are really men, and that's why they compare them like that. You see a very similar phenomenon in a lot of like medical shows where whenever there's a trans woman, she has like some sort of like gender related cancer and there's like no other reason that she could possibly ever be in the hospital. It's either like she has like breast cancer and it's like proof that she like shouldn't have transitioned, or it's like she's got like prostate cancer and it's proof that she's like really a man all along. This isn't to speak against the real risk of breast cancer that trans women like still have, just like any woman and just like any human being that has breast tissue. But trans women are like properly notified that having breasts will increase the risk for breast cancer. Trans people have a risk of breast cancer, but it's not a trans risk. It's a human risk that disproportionately affects women. There's also HIV, which is a much older stigmatization associated with trans women, but it's still quite predominant. I personally still have heard it quite a bit, and I can't entirely separate it if it's like a trans thing or if it's because I'm a lesbian. I've had partners that have told their family that I was trans, and in response they were told that they would get HIV from me if they ever slept with me, and that they would very nearly die after that, which isn't true. Trans people or gay people or whatever most certainly do not originate AIDS out of the blue. And STIs are fairly preventable if you get tested regularly, have a regular sexual health routine, and make sure that your partners get tested regularly. Especially in the case of HIV, even if someone has it, if they're properly medicated, they're non-transmissible, meaning like if you sleep with your partner who has HIV and they're properly medicated, it's an extremely low risk that you would ever have it transmitted to you. So HIV is certainly not a death sentence to anyone, and it doesn't originate out of trans people and gay people just because you've slept with them. Though trans women do have a disproportionate risk to be victimized by HIV. And this is largely due to their social conditions and the stigmatization of trans women. Trans women disproportionately rely on sex work, and trans women are disproportionately sexually assaulted. And those and many other factors contribute to STI risks, not just in HIV, but in all. But they're not inherent faults of trans women, and they deserve empathy. And when you further stigmatize trans women because of those, they only increase their risks and increase their exploitation. Just a personal side note on the topic. If you're trans, talk to your doctor about getting STI tests in your regular blood work for your hormones. They're just a very easy way to get tested when you're already giving blood. Trans women are also blamed for their own inaccessibility of treatment. When trans women share their experiences, it's not uncommon for them to be mocked or invalidated just because of them. I believe that this particular case is likely the least transphobic of all of the ones I've mentioned today. It's largely grounded in an appeal to authority as well as a just world hypothesis, but it's still used to revoke the personal autonomy of trans women. When I've told many cis peers of my own medical discrimination, it was not uncommon for them to side with the doctor instead of me. Many used my medical discrimination to tell me that I was not ready or that I just shouldn't transition at all. And they even continued to side with the doctor even after I had clarified that my medical discrimination wasn't a refusal of trans healthcare, it was a refusal of my cancer diagnosis that the same doctor gave me. I've got quite a bit of stories about my own experiences in medical discrimination, so I'll be sure to make a video about them in the future. This is most definitely a short list of how trans women are blamed for their own suffering, and it doesn't even begin to address the social factors of it. I really hope you like this. Be sure to let me know if you'd like more videos like this, because they're definitely a lot more work. If you like content like this, be sure to follow along. Be sure to leave your experience down below. I'm very interested in hearing. I read all the comments despite their impact on my well-being. I will talk to you later.